So UFC 253, I think this one's going to be a fun one. We've got some decent fights on here, not too much name value. I really think some of these fights should have been switched with last week's fight night, but that's alright. I think there's still going to be some pretty fun matchups to go over, so let's get into it. Ibrahimov versus Danilo Marcus. I wasn't able to find anything on Marcus, but he's beat nothing but cans and he's lost to nothing but cans. And although Ibrahimov in the UFC, he's 0-3 and has had really bad showings, outside of the UFC, he's got some decent wins, a lot of finishes, and I think he'll be able to beat someone who's at the level of Marcus. I don't know how, because I haven't really seen Marcus fight, but I think that Ibrahimov will be able to get the finish, most likely by submission, because that seems like where most of his wins have came from. So I'm going to go with Ibrahimov by submission. Hughes versus Juan Espino. Juan Espino, he won the Ultimate Fighter in 2018, and then he disappeared off of the face of the earth for a while, but now he's back. He's a dangerous grappler. He's got good wrestling, heavy hands, good ground and pound and top control, strong submissions, and just a really solid overall game. Hughes, on the other hand, he hasn't looked that impressive so far. He was hyped coming into his UFC debut mostly for being Stipe's main sparring partner, but his UFC stint has been underwhelming to say the least. He's a decent striker, he's got low volume, he doesn't have much power, and he isn't much of a grappler either. I think that Juan Espino will be too powerful on the feet and too good on the ground in this fight. He's old, but he hasn't fought in close to 2 years, but I still think that he has all of the advantages in this fight, and he'll get the submission in the second round.
So this next fight's an interesting one in William Knight versus Alexa Kamur. Both of these guys are pretty early in their careers. Both are really green, really solid physical attributes, and they both have heavy hands. I think this fight's fairly 50-50, but I think William Knight has the small experience advantage, and I think that the fact that he's already lost and had to battle through adversity to even get to the UFC will help him a lot. I mean, he won on the Contender Series, didn't get signed, so then he lost a fight by knockout outside of the UFC, got another win, was able to get back on the Contender Series, almost got knocked out again. Then he came back late in the first round, got the KO. I think this will be somewhat similar to that. I think it'll be a slugfest for a little bit. I think someone will eventually go down. William Knight will somehow manage to get on top and finish with ground and pound. He just seems to have that weird ability to turn the fight around pretty quickly. I think he gets the KO late in round 1 after some wild exchanges.
Shane Young versus Ludovic Klein. So Ludovic Klein, he's 16-2, and he's fought solid competition outside of the UFC. He's got 7 wins by KO, TKO, and 8 wins by submission, with about a 94% finish rate. He's got extremely solid striking. He's got some really nasty high kicks and good overall kickboxing fundamentals, and he's a really athletic guy. He's got good hands. He's pretty quick, throws nice flying knees. He's shown good wrestling defense sometimes, although there's been points where he's been controlled or taken down and controlled. But he's dangerous with the submissions, and I don't think his opponent's much of a takedown threat. If he gets on top, he's got a good ground and pound, and he doesn't settle in guys' guards. And if he does feel threatened by your bottom game, he'll disengage and bring the fight back to the feet. Shane Young, he's a good striker. He's really basic though, and he doesn't have the best striking defense. And I don't think he's much of a grappling threat. Overall in this fight, I think that Shane Young's pretty outmatched. I think that Ludovic Klein, he's the better striker. He's faster, more powerful, and more polished of a kickboxer than Young. And he has the grappling advantage if things do get dicey on the feet. The way I see this fight playing out is Klein outstriking Shane Young on the feet, chopping at his legs, keeping him at bay with jabs, landing hook counters on Young until he eventually sets up the head kick finish late in the fight. Either late in the second or early in the third, early to midway through the third.
Diego Sanchez versus Jake Matthews. I think everyone knows at this point that Diego Sanchez is well past his prime and that his chin is almost completely gone. He's still got good grappling, but I don't think he'll have the better gas tank than the younger Jake Matthews, who's typically a grappler himself. I think Jake Matthews will realize that he should use his grappling defensively because he can hurt Diego pretty badly on the feet, even though he doesn't really have much power at all. I think Diego will definitely want to get this fight to the ground, but I think that he'll be unsuccessful and be forced to strike with Matthews. I don't really see Matthews getting the finish early, but
Diego was able to survive with Michel Pereira for the better part of 3 rounds, I believe. But I think Diego will eventually get clipped and finish late, most likely TKO, but Matthews can submit him after hurting him. Also, if this goes to decision, Matthews will take it. I've got Matthews by any means necessary. Brad Riddell versus Alex de Silva. Alex de Silva, he's 21-2, but he got that record by beating mostly nothing but cans. I think on the feet he's pretty reckless. He's got decent takedown game, but he doesn't really have the best ground control. Brad Riddell, we know what he's going to do. He's a much better striker than Silva. I think he's much more technical, more powerful on the feet. I think he definitely can get taken down, but he has good get-ups, good scrambles, and I think he'll be able to keep the fight on the feet for the majority of the fight, get the better there, and then if it does hit the ground, I think he'll be able to scramble back up to his feet and ultimately get the unanimous decision. Hakeem Dawodu versus Zubaira Tukhugov. So far, I haven't really been impressed with Dawodu in his early UFC career. He was hyped up early, but I don't think he's that good. He's billed as a great striker. He's alright. I think he isn't anything special. He has some solid fundamentals, doesn't really have power, and doesn't seem to be too willing to take chances, and is not too aggressive. Zubaira, on the other hand, he's not much of a striker. He's primarily a grappler, but he's got solid power in his hands, good grappling to back that up, which I think will have Dawodu worried about the entire time, which will leave some openings on the feet for Zubaira to capitalize on. And I think overall Zubaira will be able to control where this fight goes, control the tempo of the fight, and I think he'll be able to get the decision. Ketlin Vieira versus Sajara Eubanks. So Ketlin Vieira, she's coming off of a really bad KO loss to Irene Aldana, but I'm not really going to take that into consideration too much in this fight. She's had a long layoff, so she's had time to recover. So besides that, she's a BJJ black belt. She's got a really good top game. She's heavy. She's got good guard passes, strong submissions. She can get takedowns on girls, mostly by dragging them against the fence, but she's got some great judo throws as well. She's got good elbows and knees in the clinch. Poor striking defense. She eats a lot of hooks. I think she's powerful, but she swings wildly and leaves her chin up. She leaves her hands really high, so I think she'll be open to body shots. Overall, I think there's a lot to be desired on the feet. And Sajara Eubanks, she's a multiple-time IBJJF black belt world champion. She's very well versed on the mat, although I think she can get controlled at times, but she's patient on bottom. She doesn't really make too many mistakes. I think she'll be able to keep it fairly competitive on the ground, and I think she'll be able to avoid it for the most part. She's got good boxing, solid fundamentals, she's good especially with the hooks, and she's got fast and fairly powerful punches for women's bantamweight. Both of these girls seem to have slowed down throughout their fights as it gets late, although I think that Eubanks, she's been more active, and I think she seems to have really worked on it looking at her last fight. How I think this fight plays out, I think Vieira, she'll come in swinging wildly, trying to shoot or initiate the clinch, but I think Eubanks will catch her marching forward all day with the hooks. I think she'll take them up top and to the body. I think she has a much more polished boxing, and she's well-versed enough on the mat that I think she'll be able to outstrike Vieira by a wide margin, and she'll make it competitive enough if it hits the ground that her edge in the striking will ultimately win her the decision. Kaikaura France versus Brandon Rovell. This is a pretty good matchup, basically striker versus grappler. Brandon Rovell, he's a good grappler. He's got good submissions, and I think that's where he'll need to take this fight. But I think that Kaikaura France is the much better striker, and he's shown pretty good takedown defense, and he's defended 90% of all the takedowns attempted against him in the UFC. I think this one's pretty cut and dry. I think that Kaikaura France can keep the fight on the feet and outstrike Rovell for 15 minutes and get the decision. So now we're getting to the big boys. We've got Reyes versus Blachowicz. Starting off, I think Reyes is the much better striker. He uses his range well. He's very accurate and powerful in his hands, even moving backwards. He's got good counters, and he likes to keep a good distance with jabs and front kicks. I think he's probably the better grappler, but if John Jones has a trouble taking you down, I don't think Yan's going to be able to do it. And so there should be no reason that Reyes can't avoid Yan's grappling. Blachowicz, he's always dangerous. He's got good power on the feet, always has a puncher's chance, but I think he gasses late in fights a lot more than Dom does. Overall, I think Dominic Reyes will be able to control the distance, frustrate Yan, I think he'll catch him in coming too aggressively with some wild hooks after a few rounds when Yan is pretty desperate, and I think he'll be able to get the finish late. Probably, I'd say, 3rd or 4th round. Now we're on to the main event, Israel Adesanya versus Paulo Costa. Both of these guys are strikers, and they're both going to want to keep this fight on the feet. I think that Adesanya, he's the better overall kickboxer, but Costa, he presents a lot of problems for Israel Adesanya. I think that Paulo Costa is probably one of the worst matchups for Israel Adesanya in the division, at least striking-wise, who had a hard time striking with Kelvin Gastelum in moments, who's much lesser of a striker than Costa, and Costa cuts guys off a lot better than Kelvin does, who chases people down when they're hurt, and Costa has a better gas tank and chin than Gastelum, in my opinion. Costa, he uses heavy pressure. He has good leg kicks that can hinder Adesanya's movement, and if he does get guys on the cage, he rips to the body very well. Costa, he's bigger and physically stronger, and I think that if it is in the clinch, he can use his size and strength to wear on Izzy and use dirty boxing to chip away at him. I think that Adesanya's constant backpedaling will wear him down more than Costa walking him down will, and he'll slow down while Costa will pick it up in the last 2 rounds. Israel Adesanya, he's got good counters, but if Costa can be patient and not get too wild entering within range and really pump out the jab like he did in the Hall fight while keeping a tight guard, then he can get on the inside and make Izzy uncomfortable. Because I think Izzy needs the space to get the reads and counters he wants. Paulo Costa can cut him off, and he has a chance to really negate Adesanya's style like no one else can, but that'll be really hard to do against Adesanya, who's a sniper, and he can really catch guys coming in and make them pay for it, especially when they're coming in like hooks like Costa sometimes does. Costa, he has the better chin in my opinion, and I think he can really take one to give one, and Adesanya doesn't really like being in dogfights. Yes, I know he was in a dogfight with Gastelum, but he had most success when he was at space, and he got the range he wanted. When things got more gritty and close up is when Adesanya struggled, and Costa is a much more advanced striker than Gastelum. And if he hurts Izzy like Kelvin did, he won't chase him down. He'll cut him off and pick his shots well. I think that overall this fight's a lot closer than people think, and I think Paulo Costa definitely has a chance to win. But Adesanya will edge it in my opinion. Starting off, I think that Izzy will have the clear advantage at distance, and he'll win the first 3 rounds pretty comfortably, with maybe a few troubling moments, but nothing too crazy going on at all. But I think that in the last 2.5 rounds, that if Izzy hasn't put enough damage on Costa, Costa can pick it up, and the pressure he puts on Izzy and the leg kicks will slow him down, and Costa can start cutting him off, making him uncomfortable, and really get on the inside when Adesanya starts slowing down. And I think he can win the last 2 rounds, but I don't think it'll be enough to win the decision. And I don't see him getting the finish really, because Adesanya will probably be using nothing but defense in the championship rounds. So I think the Adesanya will cruise into a decision. If this fight does get turned into a similar fight to the Gastelum-Adesanya fight, then I would favor Costa to do a lot of damage in the pocket. But I think that Israel Adesanya knows what he has to do to win this fight, and that is picking the shorter Costa apart from the outside. And I think he'll respect the striking of Costa much more than Gastelum, who I'm sure Izzy thought only had a 1-2 before the fight. At first I was leaning Costa because I think he has a lot of the attributes I want to see in someone to beat a guy like Izzy. But the difference in reach and height between the two I think will cause huge problems for Costa, and I think Adesanya will outstrike him for the majority of the fight and ultimately get the decision, 3 rounds to 2.